Am I streaming? Hello, hello. Yeah, okay, it says I'm live. Hello and welcome. Um, this is my second try for this second chapter. So, good evening. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Tonight we're getting back into On the Origins of Gnosis by Phil Langdon, P.G. Langdon. And chapter 2 is entitled The Keys to Heaven. So, let's dig in. Quote, "Be still and know that I am God," end quote. Psalms 46:10, the King James Version, KJV. December is cool season in Southeast Asia, so it was pleasantly warm and tranquil walking along the causeway leading into Angkor Wat, the Khmer temple to the Hindu god Vishnu in the Cambodian jungle. There is a sense of grounded stillness in the main temple area, as though it is a timeless domain. Within moments, my mind's eye was filled with a meditating figure that appeared as a life-size statue of a monk, as if it was manifesting a few feet in front of me, but could not be seen physically. It was such a strong image that I could tell it was made of bronze, and had the traditional Cambodian look to it, with a curling flame all the way around its body, coming to a point at the top of the head. For some reason, there was also a white circle of light on its forehead, about 3 centimeters wide. In just 3 minutes, the vision was so strong it became more real and entrancing to me than my physical surroundings. Wow. Okay, and we got a picture right here. As I looked around the circle of light on its forehead, it was producing 4 things at the same time. There were white, regularly spaced, radiating circular waves at a frequency of about 3 every second that would reach the outer peripheral vision in 1 second. Between each ring were 8 equally spaced, fainter-looking rings rippling outwards. The other 2 things coming off this light were entirely different. There was what looked like plasma-type material continuously pouring off to either side of the circle that looked exactly like material that comes off the sun in coronal mass ejections. But this material seemed to come away gently, unlike the violent eruptive material that comes from the sun. Wow! The last thing was a thin outer ring immediately around the central circle of light that would suddenly and randomly brighten and dim in intensity, like an irregular strobe, reminding me of the random flickering around the sun when viewed at sunset. All of this carried on in complete silence when I turned my attention to the light itself, which was pure brilliant white. Then I turned my attention to the light itself, which was pure brilliant white. Gazing directly into it, and wondering about its nature, it occurred to my general sense of understanding that it was perfectly still white light. I lost track of time. A moment later, I felt as though I had floated down to a level of peace and complete calm in myself that bottomed out as perfectly still. Time did not mean the same in this awareness. Like a veil was removed to reveal a different eternal present moment in which all is well. All is well. As I looked around, there was someone distinctly present with me in the stillness, who seemed to be spread out everywhere all at once. I also had the distinct impression I was in an immense garden full of paths that curl around behind the hedgerows, shrubs, and trees, and open out into groves with wondrous points of interest in each one, not unlike Central Park in New York. The person I felt was present everywhere at once, in this peaceful place, seemed to be connected with the garden, as if they were the great gardener and owner of a vast estate. The all-encompassing presence that seemed to focus itself at the point of my gaze as I was looking into the sky, and we became fully aware of each other. I'm going to read that sentence again. The all-encompassing presence then seemed to focus itself at the point of my gaze as I was looking into the sky, and we became fully aware of each other. When this happened, the presence instantly came out of the sky, directly to a position next to me, as a person would be standing. There was nothing to look at physically, but I seemed to know what this person was doing once I locked onto him. Then, as if walking casually, the spirit moved directly toward me, and I became aware of the sense of being lifted into the sky, reaching the sense of feeling weightless in 5 seconds. As I fell deeply in love with this never-ending gentle spirit, all sense of body weight disappeared and was immediately followed by the sensation of an icy cold flame, transparent with blue fringes, in the center of my chest, rising to the throat in the next few seconds, whose fullness lasted for 9 hours. Whoa! After an hour, in this blissful state, I was driven down the road to an entrance at the outer wall of an enclosure next door called Angkor Thom, or Tom, it's Thom. Walking into the large area within the enclosure reveals 3 temples, one of which is called Bayon, B-A-Y-O-N, and is the strangest temple building I have ever seen. There are 37 pillars at Bayon, each with 4 6-feet-high faces carved around them, facing all 4 directions from their square columns, at the upper floor level of the temple. Hey, Thoth Atlantean, welcome in. Good to see ya. This is amazing. This is amazing. Oh my gosh, okay. At one point, while standing in front of one of these faces, there was a sudden and quick physical sensation in the center of my head, like 2 small surfaces rubbing together. It startled me and brought my attention quickly to the inside of my head, thinking something unusual and perhaps worrying had just happened in my brain. As my attention shifted, what looked like a bubble of shiny black oil was in the process of growing from a tiny point in the center of my mind's eye view, about 2 feet in front of me at eye level. The bubble slowly expanded for 2 to 3 seconds before detaching and immediately bursting. In its wake was a word written in 3-dimensional, tall, pure white English capital letters. The word was You, Y-O-U. As I registered this word in disbelief, it faded and was followed quickly by another black bubble, which also burst to reveal the next word, R-A-R-E. Eventually, 12 of these bubbles came out of the same point, one after the other, all bursting, to finally reveal a complete statement written in plain English, which was, You are mind. Mind is stillness. Stillness is timeless. Timeless is eternal. Then it just stopped. Oh my gosh, my heart's racing. It quickly made immediate logical sense to me that anything timeless is going to be something that never changes and will be perfectly still. The only new idea was that these qualities had anything to do with conscious awareness or mind. This was a new concept to me, since I had spent most of my life wondering if consciousness was a product of the brain or whether it had its own nature, let alone what its true nature or qualities really are. After a short while, it became clear that each of the concepts presented in the statement had direct opposites that were recognizable as real physical characteristics anyone can relate to. The opposite of stillness is motion. The opposite of timeless is time. The opposite of eternal is transient. and the opposite of mind is body. We all have transient bodies that die after we live out our lives in time and are constantly changing as we grow older. This made sense. Also, everything physical is in a state of motion, since even the atoms that make up all things are made of spinning bodies, and therefore, anything sitting still in front of us, like a cup of coffee, is in fact made of things that are in constant motion. With this recognition, the word process also came to mind and led to the conclusion that processing, which takes time, is a quality of thinking, the thing we use our brains for. Duality logic naturally states that both aspects exist simultaneously as two aspects of one whole, like observer and observed. Their opposition must be extreme in its qualities, like black and white, or they would not truly be opposite. If the opposite of time is timeless, or t equals 0, the opposite of space is simply no space, or zero-dimensional with no physical measure. No measure means there is no dimension, or time, or physical size. This apparent duality of interpretation has caused confusion in those who sought to understand, but becomes clear as a natural difference between manifest and unmanifest aspects of the same single reality. In other words, both the singular reality of being, the observer, and the manifest physical world, the observed, are based on the same singular truth. This is how understanding the nature of self can be achieved from gaining measure of the manifest world. They are directly connected as opposites in a natural relationship with each other. Hey, Timo, welcome in. This is just mind-blowingly awesome. Dude, Phil Langdon, thank you. Holy majoli. And Steve, oh my gosh. I love you guys. Okay. René Descartes. For a long time I said that incorrectly, and I don't know if I just pronounced it correctly. René Descartes, right? Descartes. The 18th century French philosopher emerged from the Renaissance period as the father of modern philosophy, promoting this same duality concept. The only problem he seemed to encounter was in trying to explain the relationship between the physical body and its potential non-physical conscious source. He did recognize the pineal gland as the seat of the soul, but could not come up with a mechanism to explain how non-physical consciousness could affect the physical body. We might only say, a person's will gives rise to physical muscular responses and action. However, relying on subjective impulses is arbitrary and impossible to pin down objectively. In Hindu tradition, the same duality treatment is depicted and solved as the union of Shiva, which is consciousness, and Shakti, which is energy. Their union is the very issue of becoming self-realized. This is how Richard Alpert of Aldous Huxley and Timothy Leary Association, who became known as Ram Dass, describes the union of Shiva and Shakti. Quote, as energy, the universe is referred to as Shakti, and the Father, that which is an identity in the formless, is referred to as Shiva. The path of enlightenment is the path of bringing together the two parts of this identity until form is no different than formless, a being who has merged into that identity, clinging nowhere to form, neither here nor there, to neither this nor that, is said to be realized, which is the ultimate union of mother and father. The process of bringing about that union involves working with Shakti, the mother, directing and using the energy and form in order to transcend that form and merge with the formless. End quote. Any process of thinking is an act of refinement that leads to a state of understanding or knowing, hopefully. Ultimately, deep inquiry leads to complete understanding, like reaching the top of a mountain with a total view of what was down below. What we have focused on and put our faith in has grown into a mountain we can stand on. By using the brain, the goal of mind seems to be to understand its own oneness, reiterating the great adage, to know thyself, as eternal oneness by experiencing it directly, as the very purpose of physical existence. Out of the dual relationships, the one between time and timelessness struck me as the most interesting. I then tried to build a visual picture of the qualities of timelessness in terms that would allow me to view, in my mind's eye, as many of its characteristics as at once. It was easier to do this than to have lots of different concepts floating around individually. Timelessness was represented as a thin surface of white paint on a flat vertical surface, like a wall that was not there. It was just a splodge of white paint. Splodge. 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 S-P-L-O-D-J-E. I love it. Splodge. It was just a white splodge of white paint, dried in place as an analogy to the stillness and unchanging qualities associated with zero dimension. Time and energy, in contrast, was a set of simple hair-like waves emanating out into space, away from the white surface. I thought of time as the means to express the contents of the timeless fullness, bit by bit, as if spirit itself were being stretched out in time to be known to itself. Dude, every sentence, man, right? Okay. They both relied on each other, and yet because the timeless aspect is eternal, it exists a priori, as it were, and is the lead. It is more important than the physical world, in a way, being timeless and infinite as a source and condition. So here is a single root generating its opposite that allows the root to understand itself by interacting with its own outer manifestation. When the observer continuously truly understands the unification of the two primordial opposite issues of singular nature as a cyclic duality, they experience every aspect of singular nature instantly and spatially, from a tiny singularity at the center of the head all the way out to an infinite expanse, in a single timeless moment of sudden subjective expansion that amounts to a non-physical infinite pulse. Hey, Queen Venus! This is so good. Welcome in. So, unit squared circle and squared circle content. As the logic end of the range of observational nature, the infinite pulse as a unifying experiential event is the personal equivalent to moving at the speed of light. C, just a C, where all length and time dilation suddenly contract to zero. It takes no time to get anywhere at light speed because for light, t equals zero. The universe disappears subjectively as the observer experiences timelessness for a short period, what seems like 10 minutes. The instant I understood the chicken and egg cycle as spirit and energy, my mind suddenly slipped as if on ice, and the world spun out of control for a moment, making my surroundings like the inside of a bright eggshell the size of a stadium. A scroll, beige in color, burst out of a point of... a scroll, beige in color, burst out of a point a few inches in front of my point of view, going to the left and right simultaneously, The scroll bolted out as if its full extension was instantaneous, but continuously poured out of its source point, even though it seemed to reach its destination already. The first impression of its appearance was that of a bow tie unraveling from a singular point too small to see, becoming an extended scroll in its extension. I then turned and looked down its length, to the left, to see where it was going, and could clearly see the vanishing point it was heading into in the far distance. It is very hard to describe the change in awareness at this moment, other than to say the following events happened on top of each other without hesitation, as if the whole event existed at once, but I could experience each part individually and sequentially in what seemed like time at my own pace, albeit quick. Wow. Timelessness is a very strange thing to an awareness that has only known processes in logical sequence that take time before. Right, okay. I mean, I understood that, but I want to say that again. Timelessness is a very strange thing to an awareness that has only known processes in logical sequence that take time before. My curiosity in the scroll and its surface content brought my gaze back to it and realized that if I followed the speed of the scroll in its direction of movement, I could perhaps gain a snapshot view of its surface and find out if anything was on it that might be interesting. When I did this, the surface portion I followed showed an upper half of bright white and a lower half of bright gold that stayed in place as the scroll continued to rush along. Wow. Awesome. Thanks for coming in, Venus Queen. It's always such a pleasure to see you. Now that I got my interwebs figured out, I'm probably going to do a third narration of that first one, because both of mine, I just had such bad connection. But, dude, all these words need to be heard, right? Oh my gosh. Wow. Gold and white. In one place, even though... Okay, so... Then my eyes switched off suddenly, as if a shutter came down behind them, followed immediately by an instant and sudden vast expansion, as if my body was now an expanding spherical bubble, exploding outwards at a bewildering speed from a point inside my head. I went flying upwards and out of my body, backwards, as though I had been grabbed slightly behind by the scruff of my neck from above, and suddenly pulled billions of miles out into empty space. Almost immediately there was perfect stillness. The experience was far more exhilarating than frightening. In fact, there was no fear involved at all. Only excitement and amazement at what effectively is touching timelessness, which is super fast. It is as bizarre as it sounds, and yet feels completely natural. The only awareness now was of a black void in all directions. This space was completely empty, and I could immediately sense its vacuity, while perceiving its utter darkness and transparency. The void seemed to go on into the vast distance without end. There was no visible boundary whatsoever. Then I tried to look around, but as I looked to my upper left, I found the view did not change, and realized I had no idea if I was turning my gaze at all or if I could. There was no motion reference to contrast my position to prove it. As I wondered what to do, a thin membrane like oil on water appeared around me in the shape of my head and shoulders. I could see the head was still turned to the left and wished for it to turn back to the straightforward view. It worked, and as the head swept around to line up with the shoulders, something unexpected came into view in the near distance that appeared to be 6 thin streaks of light that seemed to hold their position and extend beyond my peripheral vision, further over to the right. As I followed their length, they led to a large white cumulonimbus cumulonimbus. Okay. As I followed their length, they led to a large white cumulonimbus-type cloud that looked like a real cloud we would normally see in the summer sky. From its body, a series of thin, white, laser-like beams of light extended out into the black void around it, making the overall shape of a cross, with 2 beams extended out in the front, making 32 in total. Every beam was the same, extending a distance roughly 10 times the cloud's length before each seemed to fade into blackness, spreading out slightly at their limits as smears of light, like 3 fingers at the end of a long arm. Dude! This is mind-blowing. My first thought, after its stunning introduction, was that it could not be real. Turning to look away into the darkness again for a moment to test my vision, I waited about 3 seconds before turning around to look again at where the cloud had been. It was still just sitting there, gleaming white. Nothing had changed. It might be real, I thought, and there was nothing I could do about it. Wondering what it was, I instantly found myself in a position more than halfway towards the cloud, but a little higher and to the right of it, from where I had just been. I had to turn to look down to the left from this new position and could see over the top of the cloud, the right-hand side, and its front end. Eee. Little alchemy bow just fell. Maybe that's a sink for someone. Now I knew I could move around at will, but held my position for a while as I gazed at it in amazement, looking up and down its upper surface, thinking of why I was looking at a cloud that is normally made of water vapor. Wishing to take a closer look at the cloud's surface, I found myself instantly in front of its face, about 10 feet away. At this close range, the surface still looked like a cloud. Looking directly up from my position, next, I could see the beams extending from the top of the cloud looked like searchlight beams pointing in different directions, frozen in place. Thinking to examine the beams closer, I found I was moving upwards, slowly this time, becoming level with the cloud's upper surface before stopping to look around across the upper surface from this point of view. There were 10 beams emerging from this super surface in 3 rows of 3 beams, going from front to back, 3, with a single beam at the back on the left. The triple rows were arranged with the same configuration as the 3 belt stars of the constellation Orion, I noticed. Then it occurred to study just one of the beams. Moving away from the beam at first to take it all in at once, I looked at it up and down from its base to its limit. There was no haze around the transition between the beam and the surrounding black space, giving it a razor-sharp definition. It was so perfectly straight and sharply defined, it looked like there was a corner running all the way up and down the beam on its edge. To make sure, I looked down at where the beam came out of the cloud, and it was, in fact, circular at its base, confirming the apparent cornering was a visual effect of the razor-sharp definition of the beam itself. Then, to get a very close look, I instantly moved right up to the beam until its apparent width was now about 15 feet, at a distance from me that seemed to be about 10 feet again. The beam was pure crystal white, solid-looking and radiant, with no apparent distinction in its appearance whatsoever. I gazed into it, trying to see if there was anything other than just pure white radiance, and couldn't detect anything at all. With that, I looked directly down from my position towards the surface of the cloud below, about 100 feet away, and noticed that all the beams at the surface were surrounded by a perfect circle, as the cloud surface neatly and smoothly curved down around them, creating a hole from which the beam projected and fitted snugly. Being satisfied that I couldn't learn anything more, I moved away from the cloud to a similar position as before, where I could take it all in at once, and had the sense like it was nearing time to leave the situation. Finally, my attention turned yet again to the cloud's surface. I had expected to be able to see its fine detail earlier, when I approached the front at such close range, but instead now found that a circular lens appeared between myself and the cloud, automatically zooming in, much to my surprise, onto one of the tiny bumps on the cloud's surface. Magnified, the bump now looked like a very neatly packed ponytail bundle curling out of and back into the surface of what immediately remained, let's try that again. Magnified, the bump now looked like a very neatly packed ponytail bundle curling out of and back into the surface of what immediately reminded me of a clump of pure, snowy white human hair. Each strand in the bundle was the same in width and length, giving a very neat and tidy appearance as it curved out and back into the surface next to other fiber bundles going in other directions next to it. The entire surface was crisscrossed with these fibrous bundles, like it was a high-tech beard made of packed insulated wires, forming a neat and tidy, impossible Gordian knot that looks like a cloud. The hair-like appearance made me think of God's big white beard and, later, the body of a sheep or lamb, even a boat with oars protruding from its hull. It becomes obvious where these religious concepts originated. Oh my gosh! With that, my eyesight faded back within a second of time. The sense of my body came back, somewhat, and I felt very calm and still, with no desire to move or speak. I couldn't speak at first anyway. That was a surprise. I had nothing to say, but I did try to speak at one point and open my mouth, but nothing came out. So I gave up on that. So I gave up on that idea. It took a few days to come back to a state where the world and its norms could be dealt with again. The mind felt like a vast empty cavern with all sorts in it that needs to be defined from this new perspective. The most prominent issue that kept flooding my mind in general after this event was the idea of a mountain as a metaphor for reaching a state of greater understanding. As if we each climb a proverbial mountain of contemplation to reach the top. As we get higher, the view behind us slowly expands, with our increasing awareness and understanding. It's not until we reach the top, however, that the scene on the other side of the mountain comes into view for the first time. From the top of the mountain, we discover that singular reality is infinite and far more personal than we once thought, but also in opposition to the dual, finite, physical reality we are used to, and yet they are one and the same at their point of union. We also realize that we are fundamentally not physical, but needed the physical world as a defining contrast to figure it out. Pod Joe, welcome in. This is just... That was the end. Oh my gosh, that was amazing. Wow. I'm really lightheaded. Thank you so much, Phil. Oh my gosh. Wow. That was something else. That was expansive. I'm sort of like, man, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I have this book to hold in my hands. Oh my gosh, I feel so thankful too. Oh my goodness, wow. Oh my gosh. So yeah, I'm just blown away right now is all. Whoa. Dang, but okay, so that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to do one chapter at a time. And I did figure out my internet. I figured it out with an Ethernet cable. Woo woo! So, dang, even though I've already done 2 narrations of the first chapter, I'm going to do it again. Because they both are crappy. And all the words are so important. Oh my gosh. So, dang. I'm just filled with gratitude right now. Thank you so much. And, wow. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And, yeah. Oh my gosh, Heidi, this is so amazing. I hope that you take a listen. It's expansive. I'm so freaking lightheaded from reading all of that right now. It's just so, it's expansive. I love you. I love you so much. Yeah, thank you everyone here with me. Thank you now, and thank you whenever you come, and I hope everyone comes and listens. And thank you to YouTube and OBS and my family and my friends, and above all, Spirit, right? Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Steve. I love you guys. I'll